Okay. Okay, let's see. Get my coffee set up today. So, what I kind of want to talk to today is this weird thing, what I see a lot. And if you look at any kind of programming tutorials, what you will basically see. And let me just generate a not like this PHP file, okay? And this is basically the kind of like nasty. I don't even know how to say it. The general. Actually, let me get that in somehow here. So what you see a lot of times, right, is stuff like this, where you say, okay, so you got your stuff here. Let's do it like that. Let's do it like that and start our body. Okay, and this we move down somewhere. Okay. So this is what you see a lot, right? And then here you would basically say your logic, right? So I don't know. Let's do it like this, maybe. Array, author, Sam, maybe like that. Author Joey and author Sarah. Okay, and then you would see stuff like this, where you say, okay, PHP, and then something like for each array as doesn't matter, right? As author. Let's do it like this. Right, and then go like that, and maybe like this. Okay, and then here you would have something like actually let me do a little author. All right, let's move this down to here, and then here you would have a td, tr, td, and then here maybe something like this. Okay, so this is how people learn PHP to this day, and it's of course a catastrophe. It's not only a catastrophe from maintainability, but those files become a absolute nightmare, right? So there are a couple of principles that you basically want to be aware of. One of them being, hey, you should probably just set out a couple of rules. Set out a couple of rules that you really need to focus on, and one of those rules is you don't need this. Okay, if your file has a PHP closing tag, you're doing it wrong, right? That's basically something that we could do. Yeah. It's probably something we could do. And in order to achieve that, what we are planning is a little bit seeing how stuff like that gets done, right? So let me just quickly, I have somebody here on the line that I kind of need need to attend to here. Let me see. Let me see how we can do this. So quickly need to see how that works. Hold on. Okay. That doesn't really make any kind of difference here. Just 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Let's get that in. Where is my stuff here? Sorry. Okay. Fair enough. So you should basically see that now, right? Yes, you do. Okay, so let's get back to the topic. So you will see that, and basically in a lot of YouTube videos and in a lot of even universities, I coach students in universities, and they would actually really write code like this to this day, right? So what is wrong about this is that basically you have a very hard time, and I don't care how you do this, right? I mean, there are different ways of basically kind of like making this a little bit cleaner and so on, but you will never actually get to the point where you say, like, I can read what's happening. And one of the reasons for that is that it's really hard to see what kind of mixture of languages you have here. Now, historically speaking, PHP started out as a templating language. So this used to be the way to go, but of course it grew into way more. And now the stuff that you want to do is basically a little bit more sophisticated than simply like filling in variables. So what people have done is they developed templating languages, and we're going to use one of those today. So I'm going to actually do the following and have a composer require neon3 apps template. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. Now, again, when we talk about like clean code, there are two ways of looking at it, right? So you might say that, well, who cares, right? When it comes to indentation and so on, and a lot of people call me a stickler, but the point is like, so someday, right, way back in our past, like we decided, hey, this is the bush that we're going to eat from, and this is the corner that we're going to defecate in. And the reason why people did that was, of course, because it's an evolutionary trait that makes sense, right? It guarantees survival. Order is actually something that we have developed because it makes sense for us, and our brain can basically grasp concepts in that manner. And I tell you that because actually this is not even the worst that I've seen. You can also sometimes see stuff like this, right? And then it's like impossible to read, or stuff like that. I mean, how you see that sometimes with beginner code that like you have no idea what's going on, right? So indentation is the first thing that you really need to get solved. I mean, nowadays, there are external tools like Prettier and so on that kind of like automate this whole process for you. But you will always have one rule that is always true. You can't say, hey, does it really matter? Because functionally it doesn't make a difference. But I'm going to respond to that you have never seen code from a coder that is respected in the community and has actually any kind of output that is usable, that does not that isn't a complete stickler. about how code needs to be written. I've had discussions with people. I've had discussions with people about like where to put the curly braces. That was before piece R12. So this was still basically oops, sorry. You know, kind of like the question, like where you place that, right? The curly braces, depending on whether or not it's a class, and so on and so on. So the those kind of questions are fought over. Like we ran through hours and hours of discussing just that, because the cognitive load of, you know, like what kind of brain power it requires to actually read code becomes more and more important, right? That's why you see, I mean, there's small things like the of how your code wants to be formatted in order to be read, that would basically help you. And the whole approach that you get more and more, it doesn't necessarily need to be OOP, but I mean, functional is also a way to go about it. And what you really want to do is embrace those principles, because they will be more and more important, and you will not be able to collaborate with people without following those principles. So that said, let's jump into the ins and outs here, right? So this is the not like this PHP. So what we actually want to do instead, oops, sorry, is so now we installed this template package. So I'm now going to create an actual index PHP, and I'm going to do that as a file, right? So I'm going to call this the index. Now, there are a couple of things. I'm not going to start with namespaces right at the beginning, but what we want to do is, in any kind of project that uses Composer, the first thing that we need to do is to basically require our vendor autoload, right? And depending on how your pathing works, so if you're using Docker and so on, be careful like what you do here. For me, it's fine to just write it like this. So now my autoload exists. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically say, okay, the things that I normally would like to do is to have a router. So this is just like if you're not using any kind of framework, right? This is basic principles here. I would like to have an MVC structure. And yeah, I normally would also like to have some kind of ORM, but I mean, that's maybe we don't get to that today. So in the most primitive form, right? Let's ignore the router and say, like, let's start with this. In the most primitive form, I want to have a couple of things. So I'm going to create a directory called views. I'm going to create another directory called controllers, and I'm going to create another directory called models. Okay, so that is the basic principle. So I'm ignoring the router now and say, like, okay, this is basically and I know that doesn't really make sense in PHP, a single page application. So the first thing I actually want to do is to say, okay, for question 1 is which controller, right? So we assume that this question is answered for us. Again, before we're going to do that, we're probably going to want to route, but let's imagine that. And here in my controller, actually, let's even make this more primitive. Let's make this more primitive. I'm going to create one view here that I'm going to be calling header. And the only thing that I'm going to place in here is title. Okay. And I'm going to create another view, also an HTML file, that I'm going to be calling footer. And for now, I'm probably just going to write a copy 2020 me in here. Okay, that's all I'm doing. And here's now my first actual view that I'm going to use, and that is going to be called index, or I'm going to call it main. I'm going to call it home. Let's call it home. Okay, and here I'm going to say section h1. This is my home page. Okay, that's all I'm going to do. So we have now a header that's basically the beginning of an HTML document. We have a footer, and we have home. Okay, so far so good. So my general structure, let's actually make this easier, is to say, okay, so I'm going to use the template and say embrace in that case. And then I'm going to start with my content. So what I want to do, my goal is of course to say, okay, I always have the header, right? And I always have the footer, and the home basically changes. Correct? Does that make sense so far? So from a high level, if I say, if I wanted to, I basically want to say echo and then whatever the header is, right? And then I want to say echo and then whatever the footer is. And in between is basically my echo whatever my main is. Okay, so that's the basic principle I want to achieve. So what I'm going to do instead is to say, okay, let's concatenate this together, right? So of course I can simply say, okay, so actually this looks like this, right? It actually looks like this, and this can be relatively static, and this can be relatively static, and this is then depends on the route I'm on. So if I do that, then the question is, oops, I've got some kind of chat message here. Oh no, never mind. Never mind. I have no idea where that sound came from, nor if you actually heard that. So let me check this out quickly. Now getting curious of what's happening here. Oh, okay, that's my actual job. Okay, let's ignore that. So how do I get this? So again, let's go back to the output. So what I really want to do is to say I have one echo that's basically going to say, okay, I'm going to embrace a particular content, and that content would basically be exactly this, right? So let's open this up now and say, okay, so I need to have a string here, right? Otherwise it doesn't make sense. So the string that I have is to basically say I want to have the header and the footer and the home. So I can of course do that by saying like, okay, file get contents, and then have my view, right? And say, okay, so that is in views header dot HTML. And actually, you know what we should quickly do is just to have that clean is let's actually define a base here. Let's define a base. Actually, in that case, a path, and that is my current directory. Just to make that clear, clean, right? That I, regardless of where I run this, file get contents, and what we also want to have in that case is our substitution. okay, which doesn't exist yet. We will get to that in a second. We already know that that's going to be necessary. Okay, so so this is basically my most primitive form, right? When I say, okay, so I'm going to get the header and then basically embrace it with something. Now, what this would do is, of course, it would give me this as a string, right? It would give me this as a string. So that's not really what I want, because I want to run substitutions based on the header. And by the way, this would already work, right? So if I were to say, hey, my substitution, that's actually an array that has title, and I'm going to call this homepage. Then what would happen now is to say, okay, so the header reads the variables that are here in double curlies, right, and substitutes it accordingly. Okay, so that can be done. However, what I really want to do is I want to make use of the power of the depth of the template engine. So instead, what I'm going to do is to say, okay, so there's going to be another embrace here, dot, okay, and get this out of here, and basically place it like that, right? And actually, to make this a little bit easier, what I want to do is use template, so I can basically make this a little bit cleaner here. It's a bit cleaner here. Okay. So again, I have my overlying embrace here, and what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to do embrace from file just to make my life easier, and basically here say, okay, so the first file I'm including is we call it path views. I've got to be careful now here. And then say header.html, and I can more or less just do this here as well, right? And I already know that this will go to, actually let's call this substitutions. This will definitely read substitutions, right? Now here's my main. This is going to be a little bit more interesting. I'm going to actually call this current route, and then I say current substitutions. Okay. And the last one is also going to be relatively static, where I was going to say, okay, footer. And my footer has the substitutions. Okay. Okay, so this doesn't exist, of course. So I need current substitutions. That's an array. We will see why that will make sense in a second. So bear with me, please. Oops. Okay. And so this would basically be a functioning index.php. Now, this is called substitutions. Okay. Now that's a little bit of a primitive way, but let's see if that would actually work. Right. So if I were to open my browser and basically say, and sorry, I'm going to push it to that screen in a second. What did I call this project? PHP Basics. Then I would do we have an index? Yeah. Then I would actually see nothing, interestingly. All right, let's put that over here and see where the problem is. views, headers, okay. Let's quickly see, this returns. Okay. Echo embrace. Let's see. So I did something stupid. Let's quickly kick this on. And then have a look. Okay. Basics var HTML basics. Aha. Yeah. Because you already assume as much, don't you? You already assume as much. And we also didn't set a current route, which I'm gonna kind of like hard code now to views, what do we say? Home.html. Now let's see. Yeah. Okay, so far so good. Now, let's basically see what we can do from here. So what I probably want to do is, in the first step, I want to see, okay, how can I change the basically what's in here, right? So if you see that again, so the title here is homepage, right? That's the title we gave it overall, and then the current substitutions in my home HTML, I don't have any kind of substitutions here. So let's here do something like paragraph and see how it works. Oops, sorry. So if I say, okay, so let's just assume we have paragraph, some demo text, then what we get here is basically the output. And of course, normally we would kind of like bind this depending on, you know, the controller and so on, and that's basically what we're going to do in the next step. But what I want to do first is, you know, kind of like at a basic design of what's happening here. Okay, so I'm going to create an asset folder. And in this asset folder, I'm probably going to place some stuff like CSS and so on. So probably for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Spectre CSS. This is a super lightweight CSS framework that I'm simply going to use right now. And as you can see, the only thing that I really need to do is this. And I think that there's a CDN. Yes, let's even be lazier here and say, yeah. So that's always going to be loaded. And actually in my case, because I have a cool IDE, I will kind of like download this stuff here quickly. So my auto completion works. Right. So what you normally want to do is, like, if you have the chance, you know, to then, you know, actually download that with npm or whatever, and don't use a CDN. I can kind of do that, and then I have it here in external libraries. See that, and then my IDE kind of does that for me. So far so good. So let's just assume that in my header I start this with a container. And the closing div in that case, of course, would be in my footer. Oops, so not what I wanted to do. Oh, come on. Okay. Right, and then I immediately get, you know, like some kind of cleaner output here already. And then basically what I probably also want to do is I want to set something else. I want to have a little bit of, and actually maybe they have that. Let's quickly see what they have here. Layout functions, flexbox grid, perfect. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I'm going to probably simply say, hold on, what do we have here? The container. I'm probably going to simply make a small style sheet here quickly. Call that style. And basically simply say, okay, my container has a flex, has a display flex. Okay, and actually my body has a display flex. And a flex direction of column. And then here I simply say flex 1. Okay, so then I also integrate that one. And basically here say, okay, that's in my, and you know what, let's make that clean as well. Let's create a base. And say base, and then asset, and then style CSS. Okay, which means that we don't have a base. Oh, it's not where we want it. It's not where we want it. That's maybe, where's our general substitutions here? Right, we say, okay, there's a base. And my base is basically, in this case, localhost PHP basics. Yeah, that's basically how I want it. And this didn't do anything for us. Wait, did I include this? Base asset style. Let's see if that's the case. Okay. Localhost PHP basics, asset style CSS. Okay. So far so good, but our container doesn't flex. I wonder if that's overwritten somewhere. Padding right width. Display flex direction column. I'm doing something wrong here. Is this the Chrome behavior? No, it's not. Well, why aren't you flexing is the question. Oh, for very obvious reasons. For very obvious reasons. Let's see. No. For various obvious reasons, let's actually see. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's better. Okay, so sorry, what I don't know if you noticed that. So this footer now moved to the lowest part, so the body now basically flexes accordingly. That's kind of the setup I wanted to go for in from a high level perspective. But it's a little bit of a detour. I don't even know why I'm doing this right now. So what we actually want to talk about is the setup here. So as you can see, this already starts to get a little bit messy, and that's probably not what I want to do. So first of all, my title is not always the same. My base might, but that's a different story. So the question is, okay, how do I make this a little bit more flexible? And what I really want to do is that this current route is something that is based on where, on a particular controller, right? That's basically what I want to do. So as you can see, so there are a couple of things that we followed. You notice that we do not need any kind of closing tags and then writing any kind of HTML here. That's simply not the case. What we will have instead is a system that would allow us to do everything basically where nothing actually happens on the index other than loading the according views, controllers, and so on. So now let's basically get into it, what we're going to do. So in the very first, in the highest level, we're going to create a very primitive router. Okay, super primitive router. And I'm basically going to write this for now just directly in here, right? Where I'm going to say, hey, we're going to work with the index.php, and then I assume that there's going to be a route, and the route is then going to be our controller. Okay, that's as the most primitive form of routing I can think of, and it spares us to basically repeat this kind of setup all the time. Because what I also see is not only do those files exist and then need like 5 million kind of includes and you name it to generate this, but also you repeat a lot of things. So in my opinion, and I mean, there are a lot of principles that are important, but the most important principle is dry. Don't repeat yourself. It's the most important principle, in my opinion, when it comes to clean code, and therefore you basically want to really look into, like, every line that you write a second time is a line that like you misplaced basically. So let's create our primitive router. So let's do just like my current route, right? Actually I already have that. So that's here. All right, let's start with this. This is our default setup. So this is happening, right? And then we say, okay, if is set, and then we simply say get. And so do you see how what we're aiming for is the route here, right? So if that is set, then we're basically going to see whether or not that file exists or not, right? So at the next thing we have to see, like, okay, does the router exist? Right, that's the next step that we want to do. And if that's the case, then what? Then load controller, right? Sorry, and this is something I should basically make clear. Now, from a layer perspective, what we're aiming for is to say, okay, in my controller, I could now basically either have the controller or not. So let's just assume that the current route is in reality not really an HTML file, but actually a class. And what that means is something that we will see in a second when we actually look at our controller here. So I'm going to create a new PHP file that I'm going to call home. Okay. I would normally give this a namespace, but let's ignore that for now. Actually, let's not ignore this. let's have a namespace that we call controller. We call controller. That's how we're going to call it. Okay, and that's basically what we're going to do. And the name of the class, of course, is home, and then the file name can be home too. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Now, what a namespace is something that you can make use of. That's the easiest form, right, of an autoloader. So if you go into the composer JSON that was, by the way, designed automatically, or created automatically when we installed this, what's it called? When we installed the template engine. And what I can do now is basically I can say, okay, there's an autoload, and that has a PSR4 in that case. And so this would be how I basically name this. So this is the controller, right? And that is in controllers, right? So, and then do I have to? No, this should work. Let's see if that works. Let's see if that works. Composer update. I haven't written this by hand in a really long time. That's why I'm not sure. Let's see. Let's actually try this out quickly. So let's ignore all of this. And so now we have our home controller. Let's actually simply have a construct function that would simply die loaded. Okay, and the only thing I really want to do here, just as a quick test, is to basically just say, hey, new controller home, and my question is now, will that load or not? So let's go over here, load it. Okay, so that works fine. That works fine. So back to what we want to do. So this is basically the controller that makes a couple of decisions, and they all make the same kind of decisions, right? It's kind of like, okay, what's the logic, and what model and what view am I talking to, right? So the only thing that my index really does is decide which controller to execute depending on the route, right? So I'm not even going to, I'm just going to assume that if that is set, that my route exists. So I'm not going to worry about 404s and catching that kind of stuff. I really don't care. What I do care is, okay, so the route basically needs to be logical from how we name it, right? So this should probably, this should work, and this should work as well. Okay. So what we're going to do is we kind of need to create our string. So I'm going to call this class equals, and then I'm going to say, okay, so that's going to be in controller, and then have a UC first, so first uppercase, right, of my get route. Okay, so that's basically what I'm going to assume here when I get the route. And now I basically say, okay, now please do the following, and say new class. Okay, now as you can see, this now only works if we visit home. So let's try this out. So we still have in our home, it should say die loaded, right? So if I just do this now, then of course nothing happens. Now let's check it out. So route is, home, loaded, okay? So what I have achieved now is basically to say, okay, this now loads the corresponding route, right? And we're not going to simply say new class, we're actually going to say current route equals, and then say new class. Do you see how that works? Okay, and that's basically what we're going to do. And so, which also means that what we write here in our current route normally is the class home, right? Which we now cannot really do. So we're basically going to say, well, if there's no route, then our current route will be new controller home. Okay, and then I get rid of this. So now basically I can simply add controllers and this will automatically work regardless of where I am. Now we have to have a little bit of a plan of where our what happens basically here, right? Do you see how I just input here current route? So this will probably not suffice. So what the construct will do is it kind of has to answer with a view. Make sense? Now a construct doesn't return, right? This doesn't return. So basically I have a little bit of an issue with how that works. So I'm gonna make an assumption now and say, hey, all of our routes will have a public view. Okay? All of them will have a public view, and how that view looks like is something that I'm going to control in my what's it called? You name it, in my controller. Okay, so then let's just say, okay, in that case, so the current substitutions is something that I don't want to worry about in here at all. And what happens in here is basically this embrace from file is also something that I don't know if that's going to be the case, right? So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of this and instead say current route view. Okay, that's basically what it's do. And it says current route not found in string. That has a lot to do with how that looks like here. This actually should work. I don't know why it actually bitches like that. Views not found in string. Why do you say string? Oh, because, okay. Fair enough. So we could avoid this with, actually I'm not going to go into that. Let's just see if that works from a very primitive basis. So what I want to do now is to say, okay, so effectively, right, and the most easiest thing that I want to do here is to say, okay, so this view equals, and then I'm going to say, oops, template, and you see my ID does that automatically to have the use then. And then say embrace from file, right? And so my location is path slash, what did we say, views, and then home.html, and in that case I would have my paragraph in here, right? Let's actually move that. So where is it? My current substitutions. That's the kind of stuff that I don't need here anymore. I'm going to place that right in here and in here. Okay. And then here the current route, of course. Oh, this needs to go away. This needs to go away. Okay. And here are the general substitutions. Okay, so let's see if that works. Let's see if that works. It doesn't. PHP basics var. I keep forgetting that we don't need the path here. Okay. Okay, so this is now my home page. And that's also basically how it could look like in a relatively regular scenario, right? So let's basically say, okay, what really happens here, right, is to say functions. I don't even know if I want to do that. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple for now. And basically go on and see what else do we need. So this is our complete router. That's all it's doing is basically routing through, generating this route based on this simple parameter here. And this should now work like a charm. The only thing we have to test is, okay, so what if we don't do that? Okay, so it still defaults to our home, right? So we would be in this else, and everything works just fine. Now, what we also want to do is to basically kind of be smart enough to connect our controller now to the right model. So what we would have in reality is that whatever this paragraph is, right, this could be something that we store in a model, and I'm not going to get into how should I say it? How models with database works. We're going to simplify this down a little bit, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, a new class here in models that we are going to call. Let's call it posts. Let's call it posts. The namespace is now models, right? It's all we do here, and that's something that already is enough for us. Okay, so don't forget, in our composer, what we want to do now is to basically say, okay, so where are models? And models are in the folder models. That's simple. You have to rewrite the autoload. That's easiest done by simply updating. And that's already it. And from now on, we can basically use those models. Now, I'm going to also say, okay, so a model has a function get all, let's say, right, and a function get, let's say, and then, you know, maybe a delete, update, you know, stuff like that. So here would now basically talk to my database, which is something that you know, like actually justifies when we go on with this in maybe round 2 or so. What we want to do at this point is get in the basic information of basically, I'm simply going to kind of fake this now, okay? So kind of like mock this and say, let's just assume that we're asking a database depending on whatever. And I'm going to say title is post 1, and content is this is content 1. Okay, and I'm going to more or less do the same thing here. Just generate a couple of those. Post 3. This is content 3. Okay. So we just imagine that in reality I would probably get this from a database, and this basically returns, the get all directly returns my content. So in my home, I can now basically use this, right, and say, okay, so what does home do? It does stuff like get posts. It does stuff like get posts. And what posts does is to say, okay, posts is new posts. And again, you can see, oops, sorry, this happened for me, right, is new posts. And I want to, in that case, return posts get all. Okay, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, instead of putting this current substitutions here, going to say this get posts and get rid of this. Okay. Now what this means is that we directly have the posts in there, and I actually want to iterate over them probably, right? So I'm actually going to name this and say posts is those posts, right? Let's clean that up a little. So that's basically what I expect my construct to do. And that means that now my home view, instead of paragraphs, basically has, you know, my posts available. Now, what you would normally do is to say, how do I iterate over it? And that's actually now where the power of the template engine comes. And my for each is going to happen basically on a PHP only basis. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to basically say, and actually let me quickly see if we can kind of have a components, like some kind of box, right? Cards, yeah, why not? What do they look like? I guess that'll do. Card footer, wait, what? With the card class. Okay, let's kind of steal that one. Just kind of steal that one. Okay, this is my home page. Newest posts, and let's actually do this for now. Okay, so here's my card. Let's say there is no card image for me, and my card title would basically be, okay, I don't have a subtitle, but what I do know is that I have a post, what was it called? Okay, I have title and content, right? So title, and my body would basically be post content. Okay, and this button, I don't know, click me. Now, of course, I want to show all of the posts, and now so let's remember how this actually looks like in my home, right? So let me actually split this vertically and get this in a little bit. Let me see if that's not visible on the stream. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay, so and let's make this a little bit easier for us to read here. Okay, so that makes sense now. So as I can see here, I have my posts, right? So, and as you noticed here, I'm just referring to post. So what I'm planning on doing is to say, okay, so I'm going to basically iterate over this, and in this template engine it works like this. I say n4 equals, and in here I'm basically writing exactly the same syntax that you would use in a for each. The only thing I'm omitting is my dollar signs. I don't need them here. So now I know that I have posts, so I can say, okay, post as posts as post. Okay, now this whole thing will now basically regenerate, and since I don't really need the surrounding div block, or I think I don't need it, I think I don't need it. I might want to do that actually nonetheless for you know, for additional spacing reasons and so on. But let's just go with this for now and see if that works. So if everything goes right, where's my browser here? Then if I reload this, what I should be seeing is my newest posts right here. See that? Content 1, content 2, content 3. That easy. And do you see how clean that is? All right, let's look at that again. So that's all the markup I need on the HTML side, right? Step 1. So my home, that's the controller. This I never need to touch again. I'm completely done with this setup. I mean, I should probably, you know, get rid of this this here, but this is my index file, and this will always run. This is basically, if you want, so my micro nano framework, and this will always run like a charm. So let's walk through it one more time again. So we basically have the general substitutions that I have for, that's probably something that in the project would include here, for example, like what's my base, right? And actually the title is something that I don't want this, right? I don't want this. I'm actually already know that that's not what's going to happen. So I'm going to call this title is homepage. But I say, of course, well, if this is set, then let's override it. Let's override it to title, and then here UC first of my get route. All right, that's probably what I want to do. Okay, and then here I can already use it dynamically and say, okay, so the title in my header is displayed depending on where I am, and maybe my project, let's do it like this. Okay, so let's try it out. Why does it still say homepage? Oh, because I actually have not set a route. Okay, so let's assume that we are now on our route home, and then you can see up here my project home, and this would be my home route, right? So let's add additional routes. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my header. So I don't need to this is the only place now where I actually need to do this, right? Is to say, okay, this is how it looks like. So again, let's steal some navigation here. Let's see if we find that somewhere. And of course, I mean, you can, this is just an example. You can use, of course, whatever, you know, CSS framework. I just didn't want to use Bootstrap because it's get slowly so tired of it that every example and every tutorial you'll find will actually work with Bootstrap. So okay, this is for side nav. That's not really what we want. That's not really what we want. I'm probably just blind. Bars? Menu? What does menu do? Yeah, I thought so. Also not what I want. This is, why is the nav only on the side? Am I just seeing that because it's, yeah, no, this is literally what it is. Okay, let's try. What is our panels? Nope. Nope. And the bars are probably, yep, also not what I expected. What are elements? Navbar. Okay. Sure. Let's do that. Let's do that. And that basically, that's the beginning of our body. So now let's assume that, okay, this is header class navbar, and then kind of going to say this is likely to be base, right? And then here we have our, this stuff that's actually interesting. So I'm not going to worry about responsiveness today in any way. So that's basically going to be my project, and here are then my routes. So let's say that that I'm even going to define this automatically, right? And basically say, hey, you know what? This is going to be an N4 as well. And I'm going to say what I'm going to call this. I'm going to say navs as nav. Okay, it's a little bit of a stupid. Okay, and then here I'm going to say nav.href, and here I'm going to say nav.title. Okay. Yeah, that's basically all I want. And then in my index, in the substitutions, let's actually be a little bit more precise here. So let's make this clean here as well. And so in my higher base, what I'm basically going to say here, navs is an array, and that's going to have a title, no href of base. Did we define base? We did not. So let's do it. Let's do it manually for now. I know, I already hate it. Let's do base. So that's basically the setup here. Right, and then say okay. This is $base, and this is $base, and then it says index.php route, and we are going to create a about. Okay, and create an about, and the title is going to be about. Okay, let's see if that works. Nope, it does not, because why not? So the header, we're going to get into substitutions, header HTML. Okay, let's see where our issue is. Let's see where our issue is in our header HTML. What did we say? Okay, N4 navs as nav. Okay, so we have the base in here. We have the navs. Did we call it like that? Oh, sorry, wrong one. The navs we did. We did, but of course this expects to be an array of arrays. That makes sense. No problem. There we go. Let's see if we're happy with that one. There we go. Okay. And here you see now my about. So this will fail because I don't have one, right? So let's see. So now we're basically completely ready with the setup of this as a total. So we should be able to relatively simple create a new file now, right? So let's see what needs to be done here. So the first thing that I probably want to do is I want to create a view that I'm going to be calling about. Okay, that's all I'm doing. And what I am going to do here is to say I'm going to make a, let's call it a section again, and here's going to be a paragraph. This is everything you need to know about me. Okay, and then I'm going to create a controller You say, okay, new class. The name, and you see how my IDE already now understands that, okay, this is the right namespace. So the only thing I need to do here is to say about and go. And now it's going to create this. And basically, I can more or less just say, okay, let's do the same thing that we did before, right? So I'm going to say, okay, so at the end of the day, we need a public view. And we need a, and by the way, with newer PHP things, what you can of course say, oh, I haven't set the interpreter to PHP 7.4. It doesn't matter. And then I have my function construct. Okay, and since this is going to be a static file, the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to set this view to do the following. To say, okay, that's going to be a template embrace from file, views, what was it called, about .html, and with an empty array. That's all it is. That's all I need to write. And now my about route exists. So yeah, that's all I need to do. I need no models, no nothing. So now if I click on this, it actually failed. No, it did not. It's just that we're not in the container. We are not in the container for why? Let me see. Why aren't we in the container? So the header, did we probably close the header? No, we did not. Body, header, container, and after that the footer. And in between that, our current route view. Kind of curious to know why that's the case. Let's actually see how this renders. Aha. So this of course should not happen. This of course should not happen, and I'm a little bit curious why that's the case. Let's see, we have made one logical mistake here apparently. One logical mistake here. And which one would that be? So we render the embrace from file from our general substitutions. So far so good. Then we have the current view, and then we have the footer. So the question is, why don't we have this in time? And is this actually a problem beyond the scope? So let's go back to here. Let's see if that's the same problem. It is the same problem. All of a sudden, what did we change? What did we change? Embrace from file. Let me think about this. So we generated here. At that point, our view exists. Yeah, I'd be interested to know. Let's do the following. Figure this out. Oops. Because we don't actually need the outer shell here. It's probably just nothing we need. Because meanwhile, this grew into something else here. Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. I wonder why that's the case. So let's see if that is, and I already have a little bit of a really bad feeling about this, because my guess is that that is the XPath of the template engine. Yeah, do you see that? So that is super interesting. Because it understands this as okay. And it wasn't an issue before because we didn't run this. Let me see if my assumption is right, because then we have found a very interesting behavior here. So in my header, let's for now take that out. Ha. Do you see that? That's what I thought. Now, you don't have to follow me on this one. This is actually a really relatively complex scenario that we have going on here. What version of this is that? What version of it? Is it, what's my composer? 1.0. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting that it happens if you use it like that. Fair enough. Fair enough. So my question is then, is this generally the case? Then we have to make a small, we have to be smarter about this. So what we probably want to do in that case, whoops, sorry about that, is to think about how we can get this into one single line. Because of course we do want that to happen. So we cannot have this open stuff here in our header. Let's do it differently then. Let's do it differently then and say, okay, we would need to basically for this and that not to be in existence yet. And so I guess we're going to build it differently. I'm going to basically create an HTML file that I will call main. I will call this main. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this header. Okay. I'm going to take the footer. Okay, once is enough. And I'm going to do this very differently. And here I'm going to say content. Okay. So instead of, and now basically I can even be brutal and say like, okay, so my header will be gone. Just get rid of it. My header will be gone and my footer will be gone. Instead, I will only have this main. Okay, and what I'm going to do in this main, let's get back to our index, is to say, okay, so we are going to embrace from file, and instead of the header, I'm going to say views main. Okay, and instead of what we're doing here, I can basically now say, okay, so my content will be current view. Okay, let's see if that works. Yeah, perfect. And it's now even cleaner. Do you see that? Very nice. Very nice. Yes. Okay, so I still have to come to an end because I have a meeting in a couple of minutes, but basically what you can see here is the everything that basically our index would need, right? To see how that's less than 50 lines, which is another kind of roundabout way to go about it. This is, just a couple lines of code everywhere, right? This is really easy to achieve. And I will put this as a learner project up on GitHub and let you know where to find it. All right. And so thanks for watching. Again, this is for now our, let's clean that up. This is basically for now our two things here. Right. So my about is now working. It's feel free to basically change everything about this you basically want, but you get the general idea of it. And we will actually continue to work on this because the next thing that we're going to look at is to work with models and databases, and I can't wait. That's going to be actually pretty awesome, I think. Thanks for watching, or will watching. I think nobody watched it live. That's fine, and we will basically get to it as soon as we can with the models. Thank you so much, and see you guys soon.